Okay, so today our guest is the man with the finest corkscrew collection I have ever seen, Mr. Blank.
Let that run for a bit. You keep letting it run, and I'll talk, and I know you'll be watching it, and that's fine. That puts me to sleep, and that's how I fall asleep, and I love looking at that. Mr. Ward put that together. We ran that over Easter break and a little bit beyond as well. Man, that time lapse is about harvest. It's about growing things, and that's what Pentecost is about. And it's about first fruits. First fruits is the best fruit of the season. Right now, the apricots, those apricots on your trees, those plums, those lemons, well, not lemons yet, that's a winter thing, but some of those crops on your trees, those are the best ones of the season coming up right now. First fruits. The last fruits of the season, those don't taste so good. This lettuce isn't going to be so good coming out at the end of the summer. It goes bitter and it's just not as good. So man, look at that grow. That last stuff of the season, not even the birds will touch. The first stuff, that's what we're enjoying right now. And what does the first fruits have to do with anything? Pentecost is a celebration that goes back all the way through the Old Testament. It was called different things in the Old Testament. It was called Feast of Weeks. It was called the Feast of the First Fruit, the wheat harvest. But the first fruits, I think the closest thing that we could have to Pentecost in America, I would say the closest thing, and it's a pale comparison, but that'd be Thanksgiving, where we celebrate the harvest. But this is the first harvest in the spring. And it happens, it happens right after, 50 days after Easter or Passover, however you're measuring it, because Pentecost means 50th. So, what is Pentecost? It's that first fruit. And Easter happens, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit comes, and let me find the verse here. Holy Spirit comes on them, on the disciples, and they go out preaching, and the people say, we hear them telling in our own tongues the mighty works of God. In our own tongues. This was bizarre. The whole world had been divided since the Tower of Babel into different languages. Because of sin, they spoke different languages. But now the gospel has come to people, and the Tower of Babel, if you remember that from your faith classes, the Tower of Babel divided everybody, but now the gospel has come, and it brings back everybody together into unity, into harmony. God times the growing of His church with this harvest. People are all there, and He adds 3,000 to their numbers. This is a big deal. This is sort of the new moment, the new paradigm for the church now that Jesus has died and resurrected. So, Pentecost. Now, the power of God, they say, the mighty works of God. And we know throughout the Old Testament all those mighty works. But the most mighty work of God, we know from Romans. I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God. And that is what they were talking about on Pentecost. The mighty works, and ultimately it would have landed in the gospel. So what is this gospel? This gospel is, well, I'm going to use a harvest to explain it. Actually, it's Jesus' example of a harvest. He gives a whole bunch of them, but I like this one in particular. And this is some sort of thing they would have heard as they were preaching of those mighty works. The kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, this is what Jesus said, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. You got the parable there? Treasure hidden, man finds it, sells everything, and with joy goes and gets that field and that treasure. People wonder, what is this field? Who is this man? What is that treasure? And when you see all the parables around it, what you see is the gospel message. Jesus is the man that goes out and purchases the field with joy. Jesus goes and purchases the field with joy. And we know that who for the joy set before him. This is the Bible. Jesus went to the cross with joy. Yeah, he had all the other emotions as well. But why did he go to that cross? with joy. For the joy set before him. That joy set before him was you and me. That's why he went to the cross. This is the gospel message they're hearing. And so Jesus is this man that goes out with joy and buys this field to get that treasure. That treasure that Jesus is buying is us. And we weren't valuable in this treasure because of ourselves, but we were valuable because of Good Friday and because of Jesus' self. He's the one that made us a treasure, calls us a treasure. This is the mighty wonder that they're hearing on Pentecost. It would be an amazing thing to hear, and an amazing thing that we hear. Now, back to the harvest, because of that harvest, you take that first fruit and you would sacrifice it. You would give it to God. And all those sacrifices, they would, if you were a farmer and you grew animals, your first fruit would be the animal. If you grew crops, it would be the crops. And so that's what you would harvest. And you do the best. You don't wait until the garbage stuff that nobody will buy. You give the best. Now, these sacrifices were a gift from God as a promise for the real sacrifice that was going to come later. Because not all the blood of all the beasts, of all these sacrifices, there were a lot of sacrifices throughout the Bible. A whole bunch of sacrifices. Not all that blood added up could save us from just a single sin. Because we have the real sacrifice coming Good Friday. Now, we go back to the Garden of Eden. Let's go back to the garden. There's a place where you harvest things, a special place in all of creation, a garden, things growing. And we know what happened there. Fall into sin. And then God comes and he curses everything. Because everything was ruined now. It was all cursed. And God just calls it now the way it is. But when you actually look at what God is saying in that garden, he's actually cursing himself. This is that great and mighty wonder. He's cursing himself. Because we know, Adam and Eve didn't know that he was cursing himself. He's always cursing me. And he's cursing the ground. He's cursing the land. He's cursing the devil. But God was cursing himself because he knew, and we also know in hindsight, that he was going to take that place. That's the great and mighty wonder that they were hearing about on that Pentecost. And the altar, all those altars, those blood-stained altars, there was only one that ultimately mattered. The one that made all of those altars have meaning was the one that happened, that was the whole universe's altar, would be the one Mount Calvary, on Golgotha, where Jesus, the sacrifice, is on that tree, his blood staining the ground. The whole universe had forgiveness because of that dark, scary altar that Jesus did. So this is the man, this is the Jesus who sold everything, was that purchaser of that field to buy you back. So what does a first fruit look like? And I've been hinting about it along the way. Now, we still have altars in our churches. Just because we don't sacrifice anymore doesn't mean we've given up on altars. An altar is a table. We even have a chancel area lately, but no altar on it. But in churches we have altars, and an altar is a place where you put things. It's a table. And on that table goes the sacrifice, goes the offering. And in my church, the elders, that's an offering plate. Maybe that's how it is at your churches and churches you've been to and seen. They collect people's offerings. That's a little sacrifice out of their pocket that they do. And they place that sacrifice on the altar. And the pastor raises it up and says, basically, this is our sacrifice to you, God. And they often place it on the altar or off to the side somewhere. Because that's where you put a sacrifice. And then a lot of times we have other sacrifices that we give. You score the touchdown and you're like, yes. And you give it to God. And that is, I guess, a way of an offering to God, and we give God our talents and all of our best. Those are our first fruits. But our first fruits are not perfect. The money I give God, what is he going to go do with it? The church will put it to good use. It'll help my neighbor, but it doesn't help God. All of the things that I can give God, it's only a partial tithe. A tithe is an offering. People usually give 10%. Not 100%. That's too much. Too much. But let's look also what's on that altar at church. On that altar is the Bible. In that Bible is the Word of God. That Bible is God laid open and exposed for you. On that altar are often the elements of the Lord's Supper, the body and blood of Christ, given and shed for you. So when we look at what the first fruit is, at the offerings, and we see that our offerings are on the altar, but the real first fruit, like what we're seeing grown, is actually Jesus himself. Jesus doesn't hold back any piece of himself. He doesn't give 10%. He was the first fruit. The Bible calls him the first fruit of creation. The Bible calls him the first fruit of the resurrection. That means that Jesus rose from the dead. And we will rise from the dead. A lot of times I just sit there and think, I'm going to go out and die, and I'll go to heaven. And then I'll just be there, my family will be here, and I'll be there, and then my family dies. But there's also a resurrection. There's a resurrection where I come back to life, and I get my body back, and someone, I don't know how it's going to work. But Jesus is the first fruits of that resurrection. So when we look at what a first fruit looks like, and what it means to give it all, we see that it is Jesus giving for us. So this is the mighty work of God as we look at Pentecost, this gospel, this Jesus. We give weekly, he gives fully. And the Spirit was present that day, all the way back at Pentecost. The Spirit was there. But the Spirit wasn't. We often focus on the flames on the head. And we say, there's the Spirit. Martin Luther liked to imagine the flames near their mouths. Because they said it's like tongues. It's like tongues, and your tongue is here. And he said, the Spirit was present because that's where the Word was. When those people were speaking the Word, that's where the Spirit is. And so when we look today about what Pentecost is about, that Word spoken to them so long ago, it's the same Word that you have now. It's not something that was one and done, and now you don't have any word. That was for them, and now what's left for us? The scraps? No, the first fruits are still there for you. Because Pentecost is about you, because you have that word. Now, in about 3 weeks, today's May 1st, but it's May 22nd, something like that's last year's school. It's like 3 weeks. It ends on a Wednesday. Some of that's finals. Well, this is Mr. Penley's last chapel. And then next week will be Miss Kraft's last chapel and all the applied kids. And then you won't have them anymore. You'll go into summer. Those 7:45 prayers, those will end too. What else will end? Your Monday morning advisory devotions will end. The lunch prayer in the cafeteria will end. And any things that your teachers do in class that shares these mighty wonders, that ends as you head into summer. And we'll go away, and sixth graders will reset to their new tiny size. And I will have to yell walk at a whole new crowd of sixth graders as they appear next year. You will have time-lapsed ahead like that lettuce, like that harvest of lettuce. And you'll come back and you'll be older. I'll be bald, you'll be older. And it'll be almost unrecognizable after your full time. And then eventually, we'll have your summer. We have those confident expectations of what that summer is going to look like. There will be highs and there will be lows this summer. We are expecting all highs, but we know there will be lows. But you have a Lord that's going to be there in those highs, in those high moments. I don't want to just focus on the low moments. I always want to focus on the highs. You have a Lord that's there because you have the Word. You take that with you. You don't want to take me with you home over summer, or Mr. Penley, or Ms. Kraft, or Mr. Cody. You don't want us there, but you have the Word. You have this Lord. Because Pentecost is for you. The promise continues that they heard. The sins that you confess are still forgiven, just as theirs were forgiven. You're still that treasure. You're still that prize. That's how Jesus sees you, because that's how Jesus made you. Through thick and thin, he is still yours. He is still your refuge. He is still your hiding place. These are all the promises that I cling to. It was given for them, and it was given for you, and it is yours to keep. Thank you very much.